Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, May 25th in the year of 2021. Welcome to another edition of Tuesday with Thom. Let me just say right off the bat, we're having a little technical difficulty on this Tuesday. And so we will work through it as we go, and hopefully it won't be too much of a distraction. Tuesday with Thom, of course, is brought to you by our partners, the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Best Girl customizes solutions to issues of leadership, access and inclusion, economic development, and communications. Best Girl creates a solution that fits your needs. Our roundtable guests, Barbara Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker, are here today. We always look forward to our conversations with them. And our special G-list guest, Novy. Dawn is having technical difficulty this morning. She is trying to work it out. Hopefully we'll be able to have her on. And if we can't, we'll work that out some other time. Dawn is a communicator, a connector, an organizer, a leader, and a dreamer. On the many hats she wears, she is president of the Emerald Coast chapter of the American Business Women's Association. And so that's our focus today, is women in business. We look forward to having Miss Novy join us if she can. So I hope all is well with you and yours. Ms. Novy, as we mentioned, is president of the American Business Women's Association Emerald Coast chapter. And that makes me look back at my history with women in business. You know, growing up in the 50s and 60s, most of the women in my neighborhood were housewives. In our family, we had one car. My daddy would take that car to work. And so we would take the bus. The kids would take the bus and go to school. And you look back on it now and you say, well, my mom was stuck in the house there most of the day. And as time went on, and in my young adulthood, that started to change with women in business. When I entered the professional world in the late 1980s, at Best Girl, they'll like that I say this, I'm surrounded by smart, intelligent women. And again, that started for me in the 1980s. I worked at Bell South. And I was the one male in our organization that reported to a female, Terry Self, in the early 1980s. I'm very appreciative of that experience with Miss Self. She was my supervisor, my manager. We had great conversations. We had it was a very beneficial relationship for me and for my future, and I hope also for her. Progressing through the 1980s, I remember there was at one time we were on the company plane, and we were going to fly down for a conference, and there were these officers on the plane, and I was on the plane not because I was an officer, but because I supported the officers and did things for them. And there was this delay on the plane, and we couldn't figure out what was happening, so I went up to see what was going on with the pilots, and we had a woman co-pilot. And one of the officers refused to fly with a woman co-pilot. And so we had to wait until another male pilot could come and serve as a co-pilot on that plane. That was the mid-80s. In the 2000s, I can remember being in Los Angeles and hearing this fire truck come roaring down the street, one of those double-decker fire truck things. And it was just blaring and rushing down the street. And I looked, and there was a woman driving it. I had never seen a woman driving a fire truck like that in my time. And finally, when I started working in the film and television business, the woman who was our receptionist at the first agency I belonged to, Ted Borden and Associates, she was the receptionist, is now the owner of Atlanta Models and Talent, the firm that I still associate with, Susan Carpenter. She's the owner, and just been a wonderful, wonderful human being to work with. Thank God we've moved on. Things have progressed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the show, hopefully when Miss Novy makes it. So let's go to the round table. Barbara Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker. Barbara Wallace Edwards is a Mobile, Alabama native, currently living in Birmingham. Barbara, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Thom. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. It's a beautiful day, and It's nice to have some good weather for a change.
Yes, it is. I got a chance to get out and walk yesterday, and it was an absolutely gorgeous evening. I thoroughly enjoyed being outside. The pollen's not too high, pollen count's not too high, so I got a chance to get out and do some walking outside. It's great.
So what's happening with you other than walking?
Yeah, well, thank you. I actually had a chance to go down to Mobile this past weekend. Thomas was sad occasion as usual. It seems like I'm always going down for funerals or weddings, and this was another funeral that I had to attend. But I think that the things are kind of getting back to normal now. The traffic going down to the Mobile area, I guess headed toward the beach, was unbelievable this past weekend. So I know you live down on the Gulf Coast there, the Emerald Coast, and I'm sure you've probably seen a pickup in the traffic and the visitors down to your area too. But it was bumper to bumper traffic, basically from Birmingham all the way down to the exit to Bay Minette. So it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually went the opposite direction. Sunday, drove up to Birmingham, and yeah, I did see a lot of them coming in, and then quite a few leaving from here because they had been down, I guess, for the week before. A lot of Tennessee, a lot of Kentucky, a lot of Louisiana. I always noticed the tags, Texas, and Georgia.
Yeah, there were tags from all over the place. I noticed, Virginia, New York, just everywhere. And, people were just traveling a lot more, I think. So they've lifted the bans for the mask in many of the states, and I think people are really getting out in COVID. They're looking at COVID as kind of from the rearview mirror now.
So let me ask you, let's talk a little bit about working women. And you were a working woman of yourself, of course. And we talk a lot about that. But I remember growing up, most of the women in our neighborhood stayed home.
Yes.
And I've seen that evolve over the years. And you certainly have held a professional job. Talk a little bit about your experience in the workforce.
Yes, Tom, I actually had a chance to work for almost 40 years. And so, I started working when I was 16, to be perfect.
Well, I figured you was going to say you started working when you were 5 or something like that, but go ahead.
So I did have an opportunity to work in a corporate environment for many, many years, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I of course, when I first started at the company, the executive level was usually mostly men. And by the time that I retired, I think that number has really transitioned to about at least 30% of the women on the executive floor of the company were women. And so it was, there was a big transition there from, seeing people, middle management, just mostly women, to them moving up to the executive level of management.
It was very interesting to watch it occur, to know what was happening behind the scenes as it was occurring, because it wasn't something that happened lightly. It was something that in some cases had to be forced.
Yeah.
As I said, the airplane story,
right.
I'll never forget that one. But yes, so let's.
I'm sorry. I was going to say I had a very similar experience in my career. I actually was a representative from our claims department that was attending a meeting with a potential customer, and I walked into the meeting, and the customer, who was the executive of a small company, basically asked to cancel the meeting because he didn't want to talk to a woman about his business. And I'm thinking, but I'm at this point, I've been in the business for 10, 12 years and knew all about it. But he basically asked for the meeting to be canceled. But I really give credence to our company. They said, no, this is our representative. She's very well trained. She knows, she's knowledgeable. And if you want to, meet with us, this is the person you'll have to meet with. So he finally agreed to meet with me and became one of our best customers as a result of that meeting. So, yeah.
Let's get Mychal Walker on here. Mychal, good morning. How are you, man?
I am doing well, Tom. I hope you are doing well also, and you too, Barbara.
Mychal is president of the Walker Agency, a full-service insurance brokerage firm. So, Mychal, tell us what's happening in your world this morning.
Well, there are a couple things that's going on, I think, of note. Of course, COVID is still in the news. And speaking of women in power, Moderna CEO Stephanie Bancel, along with the Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, they had a conversation and they said that people will need to get a booster shot as early as September. Data suggests that the booster will be needed between 8 and 12 months after the primary vaccination is done. So I want everyone to get ready for that and be aware. And I know we have some problems with people that didn't want to get the primary booster shot, but the data is suggesting that there will be some outbreaks coming up this fall. So those of us that went ahead and got our first shots, we're going to have to get a booster shot. And America's doctor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he basically certified their statements. And he said that within a year, a booster is required because the durability of the primary vaccine does not have a long shelf life.
Okay. Well,
And
we'll line up and get another shot.
yes, absolutely. But the good news is that we haven't had a lot of outbreaks in this area of the country, and the deaths have continued to go down. So if we want to keep things normal, we need to definitely do that. And speaking of COVID, and there was a lot of conversation about the disparity of how COVID affected people and persons of color. Well, there has been a research study done by the Boston University School of Public Health, where they use analytics. And analytics has been used a lot with sports. You hear about it in sports and what have you. Well, they use some analytics in researching the disparities in COVID-related deaths. And their study included non-Hispanic white population and non-Hispanic Black population. And there are several things that's interesting that they found. One is social determinants reveal racial disparities in heart disease risk. Similar factors contribute to racial disparities in cancer during COVID-19, and chronic disease death rates continue to reflect racial disparities. And the analytics that they used were age-related as well as, age-adjusted related, and they did pre-existing state-level indexes. They used 35 different states to do their studies. And what's interesting, out of the 35 states, the studies included Michigan, New York, Minnesota, and Florida, and Pennsylvania had the highest disparity ratios according to age-adjusted data. The states with the lowest disparity ratios were Oklahoma, Washington, Arkansas, Rhode Island, and Ohio. Meanwhile, and this is interesting, Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Minnesota again, Illinois, and Connecticut had the highest racism index. And they're talking about a structural racism index that causes the disparities. Primarily what the article is saying is before you can get things level, they have to dismantle the structural racism structure itself in healthcare and access to healthcare.
Okay. All right. Barbara, you got any comments on that?
Oh, yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I hear you. None of it's surprising to me.
Right.
You can't have disparities in every other segment of society and not have it. When they put those statistics up, it's almost like, okay, what else is new?
Right. That's so true.
It's systemic, and goes back a long.
Well, Tom, what it does is for us, those of us that are part of that segment of society, we knew this all along.
For sure. We
knew about the racisms, or say the unjust criminal justice system with police brutality. We were always aware of that. Now, the rest of America and the world is catching up because of the George Floyd incident, and it was caught on tape. That's what's bringing this to light, just like this study is.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting is, more and more that seems to come to light, and cameras, the body cameras didn't help as much because they just lied or just hid the evidence. And so where we are starting to get truth is from concerned citizens who have phone cameras and are recording incidents that then those officers or whomever can't cover up because it's out there in the public arena.
And even though you have these recordings, Tom, there's still people that make excuses for it. They don't believe that, what they're seeing. I don't know how they can not believe that, but there are those who still want to make excuses for it, saying, well, there must be another reason. There must be something that we didn't see in the video that may have caused that. Well, no, it's something that's been happening for ever, and now we finally have evidence of that.
Yeah. And hopefully people will be held accountable. I saw in Minnesota where they're doing they've sort of dealt with the language in terms of not necessarily defunding the police, but certainly reforming the police. And I think we had that when we had Mr. Novy on, our police consultant. What else is going on? Let's in the world out here. Barbara, you wanted to talk about the Olympics.
Yes, Tom, there's been the U.S. is urging U.S. citizens not to travel to Japan for the Olympics this year because only 2% of the population there has been vaccinated. So they're saying that they're warning U.S. citizens that there's a huge risk that they could contract COVID if they actually attend.
Oh, okay. So does this mean that you're not going?
I'm not going. And I would encourage anyone that I know not to go. They still haven't said that whether the U.S. will actually have team there. So, I'm still wondering, okay, you're encouraging visitors not to go, but what does that mean for the participants? Does that mean that the U.S. is going to pull out and they're not going to have Olympic team?
I have no idea. I just remember the one time I think we didn't go was when Jimmy Carter was president.
That's true.
And it was a boycott.
Right.
And we didn't go. I don't know. The Olympics is a great thing. It isn't, maybe the emphasis isn't on it like it used to be.
Yeah, that's true.
The emphasis was every 4 years. This was just this major thing. Couple of other quick sports things. Mychal, you was telling me about Dominique Wilkins, and did I was gonna call them the Falcons? Did the Hawks win that game? The Hawks won that game, didn't they?
Yes,
they beat the Knicks.
They beat the Knicks on a last-second shot by Trae Young, the guard.
Yeah, the little guy.
Yes,
he's tough. He is tough. I mean, when you say the Hawks and the Knicks are the playoffs, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I didn't know the Hawks really.
Wrong,
I almost forgot the Hawks had a team over there. You don't really hear much about them anymore.
Well, the Knicks as well. I mean, actually, for me, it was. I watched a good little bit of it because it's fun to watch the new teams play. The teams that haven't been there with the younger guys.
True.
That guy from Phoenix, man.
Devin Booker.
Oh man, that joker. He's special.
Yes.
He really is. And they're playing the Lakers. Lakers gonna have their hands full.
That's true.
Yes.
That guy is special. And the other one, I was in New Orleans. I guess it was a couple years ago, and I saw them play Denver. And that's when the guy who's with the Knicks now, who had been with the Lakers, was at New Orleans. And I couldn't believe the Lakers let that guy go, man.
Julius Randle.
Yeah, man. Julius was the real deal. So
yes.
Yeah. So we'll see. Anything else regarding working women or what have you?
Well, go ahead, Barbara.
No, go ahead, Mychal.
I just from a working woman perspective, I'd like to maybe comment a little bit on my grandmother. As you all know, I was raised by my grandparents in Auburn, and my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, and my grandfather felt like it was his responsibility to take care of the family, and my grandmother was to take care and run the household. Well, that all changed when I was 10 years old, and I went to New York to visit my mother, and my grandmother was sitting at home with nothing to do. And my grandfather at the time was doing jobs all over the Southeast. So she was sitting there with nothing to do. And I recall her having a conversation with my grandfather and saying she wanted to go to work. She needed something to do. And she realized that when she was home all summer without me there to boss around and without my grandfather there to boss around. And reluctantly, my grandfather said, okay, because he looked at it from a sense of pride, like he was incapable of taking care of the family, and finances was not the problem. She just wanted something to do. And he said, well, okay, you can go and look for a job and see what you can do, but it's only certain kind of jobs you can do. And I recall she ended up going to work at Auburn University with what used to be called the Auburn Extension Service, which is now Outreach. And she was a nutritionist. And you remember back in the day, now we had food stamps or a debit card for people that need support. At that point, the government will give out food, but they found out that a lot of the food was going to waste because the people that were receiving it did not understand how to prepare it. So she was hired to go out into the rural areas of Auburn, like Lochapoka, Notasuga, those different places, and prepare meals for the people's families that were receiving that food. And she continued to work from that point on. And it gave her a sense of well-being and pride to do something like that.
I can imagine. I mean,
Yes.
I look back on it now and I think about it. Man, just sitting at home all day. I mean, not that they were just sitting there. I mean, of course they were. I mean,
they had a job at home.
Exactly.
Right.
It was a real job too. And
Yes.
I don't want to discount that at all.
Right.
But yeah, I could see where it might be interesting to get out every now and then and see some other people.
Right. Yeah. My mom did the same thing. There were 6 kids in my family. So when my youngest sister started school, my mom finally looked around and she's like, I mean, yes, I have housework to do, but that's no fun.
Yeah.
So she, that's when she decided she was going to go back to school, and she went to night school and got her degree and decided she wanted to do something besides sit at home. She said, I want to be educated and I want to use my education. And she decided she was going back to work. And of course, she was like, my dad was like, well, she won't really find anything that she's going to like. She'll be back home in no time. And, here 30 years later, she finally was retiring. So, yeah, women today just don't want to sit around the house anymore. And again, we use that term lightly because we know they're not sitting around the house. They're actually working around the house. But they want to do something else besides, being in the house all day.
Well, and the world has changed so much.
Yes.
And it's much more expensive to live. And sometimes it takes the 2 incomes to make things work. My mom did the same thing. She went back to school and then ended up working a little bit, but it was interesting. And there were all kinds of work, I guess, that was available, and then there were all kinds of work that wasn't available.
That's so true.
So I can remember we did a program in Birmingham, Project Corporate Leadership, which was basically aimed at middle management people. And many of the women who have moved to the higher levels of business in Birmingham came through that program. And that was something we were fortunate enough to be involved in, and very proud that it's worked out that way. So you guys, either one of you got anything else?
Well, I can mention that a couple shows back, I mentioned the fact that the Biden administration are trying to lower drug costs. As we all know, that prescription drugs is very expensive. And there is a fight brewing in Congress over that. And it's going to be fought with dollars. There are millions of dollars that's being poured into this campaign. One side, of course, is Big Pharma and their lobbyists that are big spenders, but there are a lot of consumer groups that are raising money to push the effort to have Medicare be in the position so that they can negotiate and lower the cost of drugs. So, and you've got people that are on one side that are aligning with the other side for various and different reasons, and vice versa. So we're going to have to see how this is going to go. However, it is a agenda item that the Democratic Party feel like it is one in which they can hang their hat on, because it would be doing something for the public. And it's also stated that 89% of those legislators that have been polled suggest that it will show up at the ballot box. And that's something that they can run on if they get behind it and support it. So stay tuned. There will be much more to come on this issue.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to our Best Girl message. Today's show is sponsored by Best Girl Incorporated.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly Gossom, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
Okay, we're going to go to the G list, where everybody is a star. Hollywood has the A list, and here on Tuesdays with Tom, we have the G list. And our guest, and I'm hesitating as I go, is Dawn Novy. And Dawn is a communicator, a connector, an organizer, a leader, and she's a dreamer. She's president of the Emerald Coast chapter of the American Business Women's Association. We've had a little trouble getting Dawn on this morning, so let's see if she's here, and we'll start. Good morning.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you. All right, how are you? Okay, you must not hear me. Okay, I guess she can't hear me.
So I can't hear anything.
Okay. Let's see if there's anything we can do on this end, Emily. So can she, Dawn, can you want to talk about ABWA? Okay, we're back. We're having trouble here. We're going to probably go back to our round table and have a little further discussion with Mychal and Barbara. And then we'll come back and see if we can get Dawn on. Stuff happens, and we just we've learned to roll with it. Barbara went through those issues and still going through them.
Still going through them. Yes.
And she just can't hear. I don't know what that issue is. We're going to see if we can get her back on again. Let's see. I wanted to. Today is it? I hate to say anniversary, but in the day that's connected to George Floyd's murder.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
This is the the 1 year anniversary, as they call it, of the murder of George Floyd. So I understand that President Biden had invited his family to the White House to commemorate the day. And I think there's a lot of special programs planned for the day.
Okay. Speaking of President Biden, that's an interesting thing to hear. How do you think he's doing?
I think he's doing a good job. Of course, there's a lot of issues that he's had to face during his administration. So I think his first 100 days on the job, he received one of the highest ratings of any president in quite some time. So I think the general public thinks he's doing a good job. Mychal, what are your thoughts?
Well, we start by saying the bar wasn't very high, but I do agree that President Biden has done a great job, especially with the vaccination and getting people vaccinated. He had a goal of 100 million people, I believe, vaccinated in his first 100 days, and he surpassed that. I think that also, just to be fair, we have to acknowledge the fact that the former president did push the companies to get the vaccine out. But as far as disseminating and distributing and getting it in people's arm, President Biden has done a great job with that. I think that from the foreign policy standpoint, there are a couple of issues that he's going to have to deal with, and particularly the southern border. And now we have the crisis in the Middle East. But overall, as far as what he's done inside the United States, I'd have to give him an A at this point on that.
Okay. Well, it seems as though public approval is there.
Yes.
And I think, as you say, the bar is pretty low, and this is this was low enough to where he could just step over it. He didn't have to jump.
Exactly.
But he's a decent guy.
Right.
Yes.
And he seems to be a good human being.
Yes.
And I think we needed that in the office.
I heard someone say just the other day that it's really good to see someone speaking now and they really are knowledgeable about the topics that they're discussing. They're not just reading something and have no idea what they're talking about. That's at the head of our country. So I think that's a good thing.
Well, I've talked about leadership and displaying leadership in time of inconvenience, and because I'm in the insurance business and healthcare is one part of it, one of my big issues with the former president is the fact that he wanted, and all he talked about was replacing Obamacare, getting rid of Obamacare. However, once the pandemic hit, rather than providing a special enrollment period for those American citizens that did not have health insurance where they could go and sign up for Obamacare during this time, because I just finished talking about the disparities in healthcare related to African Americans, and not just African Americans, people that are economically challenged.
Yes.
What it boils down to. Rather than utilizing that as an opportunity to show leadership and put petty politics aside, he refused to implement a special enrollment period. Biden did that. And for that, I have to commend him on that. Many times when you're in a leadership position, you may differ with somebody from a political standpoint or the basis of the way it's constructed. But when a crisis occurs, you need to put that aside and use what's in place right now to do that. And I recall getting feedback that the former president would not implement a special enrollment period because he's trying to sue to dismantle Obamacare.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
To me, that made no sense. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say they were obsessed with it. And
yes.
It didn't make any sense other than what are you going to replace it with? I mean,
Right.
I've always felt that we should have insurance, medical coverage for everybody in the country, however that works out. And I'm not the one to work it out, but you said something earlier, and I think Dawn's on, so I'm going to go with her in a second. But you said something earlier about the people in Congress, and it's going to be brewing up to be a fight. Well, shit, everything is a fight.
That's true.
You can't even pass a budget without fighting over it. And the whole thing about the infrastructure bill. Okay, there's some things in there you don't agree with. There's some things in there that President Biden wants that you don't think is here. Then just sit down and work it out.
Right.
I just think I think we should revolt, not in terms of being in the streets and throwing bottles and stuff, but we should revolt by our votes.
Absolutely.
And not just vote for somebody because they got an R behind their name,
right,
or because they got a D behind their name.
Right.
And you end up in a situation where you get somebody who is dumb as a rock and they become a U.S. senator.
Are you talking about a former football coach?
Let me go to Dawn now.
Talking about our state like that.
Good morning, Dawn. Is it working this time?
Let's try. Can you hear me?
Oh, I hear you
Yes.
now. Thank
Great.
you so much. So, Dawn, let me just tell you, we're going to back up this. I'm going to introduce you to Barbara Wallace Edwards here and Mychal Walker.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
We are glad to have you on. We want to talk about ABWA to start off, and you can just tell us a little bit. You're president of the Emerald Coast chapter. Tell us about ABWA and what is it you guys do, and how are you empowering women to make a difference in this world?
I was going over some notes this morning, and I think that what I love most about ABWA are the core values. A lot of times when you're and I think we need to make a change on this. When you're looking at the website, you don't even always see it. And I think it should be front and center so that people can see what the core values of the organization are. And I'll read them to you. Giving members a voice, treat people with dignity, lifelong learning, value for members, meaning like continually trying to find value for members in their membership, achievement, visionary leadership, focus on the future and results, manage by fact, and manage for innovation. And I love all of that so much. The intentionality of it all for women is right where I'm at in life right now. The mission of ABWA is to bring women of diverse occupations together to help them and help themselves, and others progress and grow professionally and personally. And we do that through education, networking support, recognition at the local and national level. And I think that I've been finding a really beautiful thing in it. And I think the most enjoyable part is being able to lift other women up who you otherwise see, they look pretty strong and they're out there doing things in the community. And then you get to talk to them and you realize that they're dealing with their own insecurities and worries. And, some of them are amazing and have something to share. And so you bring all of that together and empower them.
Now ABWA is a national organization.
It is.
You're president of the Emerald Coast chapter.
Yes, our little chapter in the Panhandle. Yes, the Emerald Coast chapter, I believe this past March celebrated its 38th year.
Wow.
And that includes a couple of years as it being, I think 1983 was when the Fort Walton Beach Charter chapter began. And then some years later, it changed and it took members from like the Crestview area and that original chapter and came together as the Emerald Coast chapter. And so right now we're just under 40 members. I think when I joined it was a little over 50. We're pretty proud to be able to maintain that. Just through COVID, we saw some people take off and go in other directions. And then it was just keeping the connection was difficult. But we've brought in several new members this year, probably at the same rate we did last year. So things are looking up, and that's with not being able to meet in person a lot of the time. So
I was going to ask you about that, about you get to be president of an organization, and then COVID hits.
Yeah.
And how did COVID affect not only ABWA, but your business personally?
Well, I'll start with ABWA. The hardest part was the connection and the relational style of being together is super important for this type of membership-based organization. I mean, you build relationships, you find out more about what people need and what they can offer, and then you connect them accordingly. And so when we can stay connected through virtual, we can have our chapter meetings, we can have phone calls. The board and I, we had several call campaigns, I guess, just to stay connected with everyone, to see what they needed. A couple of people were sick, and so we tried to organize people to make sure that there was some support for them. That was the hard part, but we managed to not fall through on anything. In fact, last year, the chapter's major fundraiser and outreach project is the Women Empowering Women Symposium. And last year, with, all of the talent and creativity that we have within the chapter, we took a fundraiser that we had built up to, I think when I took it on with my team of people, I believe there were like the symposium the year before probably had maybe 40 people, and it was held in one room in a hotel on Okaloosa Island. And then this team of 11 came together, and we ended up more than doubling the attendance. There were over 100 people there. We were at beautiful Northwest Florida State College. We had a full day symposium, raised over $4,000 for the chapter. And so we were on the move. We wanted to make sure that the next one was even better. And the example is that we took a step out on faith. We secured a luxurious luxury resort on Okaloosa Island. Wanted to make it more attractive for a weekend trip for members throughout the state and close regions, maybe in Mississippi and Georgia, Alabama, and then had to make the tough decision to make our symposium, move it like 6 months and make it 100% virtual. And so we still managed to have about 75 people in place. And honestly, blessings come in funny disguises, right? If we hadn't had that challenge, we wouldn't have raised the money that we did last year, because hosting it virtually 100% reduced a lot of our expenses. And so we were waiting for last year to be sort of a building year where we knew that we probably wouldn't come out with a big meeting our fundraising goal, but that we would set ourselves up for something where we could grow the symposium and make it bigger in the future. And so, blessings in disguise.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
So as far as my business, though, I work for the Gulf Coast Minority Chamber of Commerce. And then I also have some like social media and writing clients that I have. Usually I have 2 solid ones, and then there's others that come and go. And those stayed strong because most of that work was all internet work. So I was able to.
You did some work for Best Girl, I remember, and we certainly appreciate what you did for us.
I appreciate the opportunity. Believe me, that was challenging, and I'm glad that I have that under my belt now.
Okay, let me and I want to get Mychal and Barbara, and we're running a little bit behind. That's okay. We can work that. So what I want to do before we get into all the questions is there anything that you wanted to talk about before we get into asking you the questions and maybe go down another road?
Well, I would use time to talk about the Women Empowering Women Symposium. We, again, this year, will be hosting again this year, and we're moving it to August. We ended up doing that last year. It's usually in May, perfectly timed between Mother's Day and graduation, and a perfect time for these women to like go and dedicate some time for their personal and professional development. But we had to move to August. And so this year, August 14th, we're hosting our 5th, I believe it's the 5th annual Women Empowering Women Symposium. We just rolled out our sponsorship packets. We're about to roll out a speaker application. Usually we do those searches in-house. It's still a little bit of an in-house search, but this year we've had a lot of people show interest in wanting to be speakers. And so we're going to do this to be a little bit more efficient, smarter with our time. And so I would just want to put it out there that that it's happening on the 14th, that we have great results and reviews from people that attend. 74% of respondents from last year said it was an overall excellent symposium and high value for them to attend. I love some of the things that people have said, and I would just want to read one to you. This is a fantastic event, and I'm so thankful that I was able to participate. This is my first symposium, and I'm already ready for another one. The women organizing the event were not only friendly and prepared, but they were strong and supportive. The women presenting were also strong, supportive, and inspiring. The amount of actionable information I received is amazing. I am often someone who does not participate and sits back. I found myself not only wanting to join the conversation, but I wanted to interact with the amazing women I was sharing my day with. Thank you so much for being adaptable and making this work with all the obstacles that were in your way to make it happen. My outlook and view of myself has dramatically changed.
That's great.
Right?
Great.
Like that's
Great.
the goal. That's the goal.
So let me ask you, we've got people in about 23 different states. If they're watching this, can they find an ABWA chapter in their respective state?
They absolutely can. I mean, I think it's as easy as putting ABWA near me in your search engine. And then also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Facebook or even Instagram if you need help finding someone. I'm a fairly new member. Some of the members in my chapter have been members for over 20 years. But in the last 3 years, the amount of people that I've connected with across the country is pretty amazing. So sometimes I could directly connect you with someone. I think most recently I connected someone in Connecticut. So that's a satisfying part of the work too.
Okay. So Barbara, you got some questions for Dawn?
I do. Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning.
You mentioned in your bio that you live for those aha moments. Tell us about an aha moment you've experienced in your current position.
Well, honestly, when I think of aha moments, I think of ones mostly from the past. There have been some now, but I think most recently, because I worked with youth for a long time, and that's when it's a really beautiful thing, right?
Yes.
But part of what's neat about all the things that I'm doing right now is that the way that you approach work and being immersed in the community and helping and doing things that matter, it's not so different with adults. It really isn't.
Right.
I think for me, the realization, the aha moment was for me. And usually I like to see it happen for someone else. But the most recent aha moment was that as strong as you like to put yourself out there as a confident, reliable person, you preach a lot of things about leadership and diversity and inclusion and empowerment. And you have so much work to do on yourself.
Yes.
Like, don't think that anyone is perfect. And leadership isn't about perfection. And it's about like realizing that you're not perfect and continuing to work on it.
Yes.
And so that's been my aha. I make a lot of mistakes while I'm trying really, really hard. And I'm like, this is not fair. How do you try this hard and you keep making mistakes?
I think that's part of that growth process. So yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you. And I noticed that you're a graduate of the University of Maine. Is that correct?
Yeah, a small humane system school, probably one of the smallest on the coast. I think it was on the easternmost part of the United States. Very cold.
I bet. So are you a native of that area?
I am. I'm from Maine originally.
So how did you get to the Emerald Coast? What brought you down south?
Well, I never liked cold weather. It put me in the dumps. And so, you can imagine if it's, the winters are pretty severe, although that's changed over the years, but I didn't really realize how much the weather affected me personally. And so I always just wanted to be in tropical weather.
Yes.
And so that combined with the timing of wanting to be closer to a sick friend who'd been struggling for a couple of years, I knew that Florida was a stop that I wanted to make, but I ended up making a home here after coming to stay with a friend who needed a friend. So,
wow, great.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful part of the country.
It really is. It really is.
Okay. Mychal?
Well, good morning, Dawn. And let me say congratulations on the many accomplishments and accolades you've received.
Thank you.
My question is, I notice you have a background, and you mentioned it with Barbara Boys and Girls Club and what have you. With today's youth and what's going on, it seems to me that they are in need of something. What type of program, if you could develop the ideal program or enhance some that exists, what would you do in order to help our youth? And I'm talking both boys and girls.
I am a big proponent for community conversation. It's one of my most favorite things I've ever been involved in. And I think that it takes skilled facilitators. I think you can't just pick anyone that you think is a leader to be in the panel, because I think that you dig into conversations, especially, our current times. They're so complex. It's more than one layer. And like kids, just like adults, need to talk things out and work it out in their head and together. And as long as they have someone that will let them say things the only way they know how to say it, and then talk it through with them, they'll find it to be a safe space. And then they'll really let some things out that they're walking around holding on to. I mean, as adults, we do that too, but especially young people, because we have, that's such a perfect time to mold and to shape and to give freedom to who they are and who they're going to be. And so if I was back in it right now, that's what I would be focused on, creating a space for them to talk freely and making sure that I had the most diplomatic, the most informed, the most passionate people facilitating those conversations.
I'd like to comment on that. I've witnessed this 2-3 times in what could have been very contentious environments where young people were unhappy and needed to vent. And in both instances, the leaders of the respective organizations that they were venting against just let them talk and let them say whatever they wanted to say until they finally ran out. And then those two individuals maybe made some comments that weren't contentious, didn't criticize what the younger people had said, but it lowered the temperature of the situation and then allowed the situation to start to move forward. Didn't engage in a back and forth with them because I don't think that would have done any good. Okay, who was that? Who asked that question? Was that you, Barbara?
That was Mychal.
Okay, Barbara, have you asked? Let me ask this. I want to ask Dawn this. Dawn, I'm very familiar with Quint Studer down here, who is over in Pensacola. And the region, people down here consider the region from Pensacola to Panama City. But Mr. Studer has done quite a bit for the community. He is very much progressive, done a lot for downtown Pensacola. I think he owns the baseball team over there, the AA team, and just is very forward thinking in terms of development. And so you are now enrolled in the Studer Community Institute's Leadership Certification Program for established leaders. Tell us what that is and what that means, and what are you going to be doing?
I'm so excited about this. I honestly, I think that I stay informed about what the Studer Community Institute is doing. I too believe that they're forward thinking. I too think that it's a super unique thing. I haven't lived everywhere, but I think it's a super unique thing that they're doing, that he's built on building better communities, leadership, early learning, civic, like even just the building up of a community and like what you can do to make it more inviting and to increase belongingness. And I just think that it's amazing. So I'm always paying attention to what they have going on and what I can get into. So I had recently volunteered for one of the events just to help put some packets together and be of assistance during the symposium that day. And because I wanted to go to that training. And so oftentimes you can volunteer for a couple of hours for a couple of days, and then you can attend the training for free. And so it was just around that time that I was receiving emails about this leadership certification program. It was good timing for me because when I embarked on what I call a professional development, a professional transition a couple of years ago, I left a job I loved with the intention to go back to school. And then I have to admit, a year later, the expense of it scared the heck out of me. I think I spent 15 years paying off my undergrad, and I didn't go to school to be a doctor. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have a serious, but it took me a long time. And so I thought there's other ways for me to develop myself. There's other ways for me to stay learning. And so I dug into learning more about this leadership certification program that is obvious. They've put so much work into making this a legitimate program, one where you get your certification and then you renew every year. So a year after I've finished about 15 credits in 1 year, you have so many classes that you're supposed to attend in person, and then the rest you can do on your own schedule virtually. And I just thought that for me in my own leadership development journey, that this was going to be perfect. I loved how the first courses I went to were a lot about emotional intelligence, that self-awareness. And so I can smile a lot right now, but everybody that knows me knows I can be kind of fiery too. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit more. And, I was also embarking on some new opportunities that I thought that it would be a nice thing to have under my belt to take with me. And so I'm just now getting started because in my first month, I had taken on a new job and it decided that it wasn't really right for me. And so started back into my other work. And this was right after I enrolled in the program. So now that things have settled a little bit more, I've started going back in and started my courses and have finished one, and I'm starting another one on Wednesday. And so this is probably one of the things I've been most excited about in the last 6 months, because I think that especially around in this area, people really recognize the Studer Community Institute and they value it. I think it's a respected source. And I think I, at the time, was worried about paying for that as well, even though it's actually like the most economical way and most accessible way for someone who's coming up or wanting to sharpen skills to get into a good, reputable program. And so they have, I believe it's called an Angel Scholarship. And I applied for it, and a local businessman afforded me the opportunity to attend by paying my tuition. Nice. So I received a scholarship to be able to attend. So it's one of the biggest things I have going on right now. I'm pretty proud of it. Yeah.
Barbara, you got the last word here.
Yeah, that's great, Donna. It sounds like a wonderful, wonderful program. I wanted to ask you about your challenges on the job as a woman. What is one of the biggest challenges you face today as a woman in the business world?
I think it's most recently, I'll have to admit, I believe that I wouldn't want to call it just as the same as in similar as in racism. As a woman of color, I think that it's similar in the difference between explicit and implicit, the difference between a microaggression and a total, really not realizing what you're saying or doing. And so sometimes you can excuse things away and feel like it shouldn't be addressed, or you don't need to address it every time because something that you hear, something that's done because the intention's not there. But what happens is the responsibility, and I hate to say this, but we do have a responsibility to say something, or we don't capitalize on the opportunity to change. And so, yes, I have, and I try to be really aware of myself and make sure that I'm definitely not on the prowl for these things. I happen to have an ability to recognize it even when people don't other people around me who I trust don't realize it. And most recently, it's been sort of a gaslighting situation, that, you know, in gaslighting situations, you can end up going home, especially if you're any bit of a reflective person, and let voices get into your head that maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe he didn't mean it that way, or maybe she didn't mean it that way. And that's what happens. It drives you mentally insane.
Yes.
But the truth is, if you trust yourself, you'll know that that didn't sit right with me. And
Right.
I understand that it wasn't your intention to offend or make an uncomfortable space for me, but you did. And
Yes.
so how I receive it is actually what's most important. And I need to let you know. But do I think it's our responsibility all the time to address it? No, I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think that we have to be committed to creating spaces where everyone feels safe and valued and heard. And yeah, there's challenges for that as women, especially I'm 6 feet tall. My voice is loud. Sometimes I can be fiery. You know, sometimes people don't like that. Sometimes
you almost got the big black man thing.
sometimes you're just too much for people.
Yes,
But,
absolutely.
you know,
Mychal and I often talk about the big black man thing, because if you're a large black man, it's amazing the reactions you get in the world from people when you just walk in the room. It's a very interesting thing. Hey,
my
Dawn,
uncles are like 6'9".
Yeah.
And so when they walk in, they duck their heads sometimes. And yeah, some people, you know, sometimes they
get double takes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Dawn, I want to thank you so much for being here. Let me just say, Dawn went through extraordinary lengths to be here this morning. From time to time, we have issues with the internet. We've had issues with the internet with Barbara.
Oh, yes.
Until where for the last 3 or 4 weeks, she's had to go to a remote location to do the show, somebody else's office. And I think Dawn had some issues this morning. So we thank you so much for, I think you had to drive about 20 miles or so to get to an internet system that would work.
I started to, but a neighbor had AT&T, and AT&T wasn't down. But Mediacom across Gulf Breeze is down. So
really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Well,
Phone service too.
Barbara's issues were with AT&T.
I was going to say, maybe I need to move to the Emerald Coast then, because AT&T down there works. Not working up here for me.
Oh, well, let's see. Okay, let me do my closing commentary, or as I see it. And here's just some global and national facts about women in business. Women now account for 40% of the workforce in more than 80 states and control more than $20 trillion in annual spending. Women now own 36% of global small businesses. In the last 20 years, the number of businesses owned by women in the United States has increased by 114%. Women own 4 out of 10 businesses in the United States. More than, the unique challenges of starting a business go beyond normal work. And I think that's for men or women, and often friends and family who work traditional jobs. And I agree with this 100% in terms of relatives and even some friends who work traditional jobs just don't understand working for yourself or being an entrepreneur. It means that Saturdays and Sundays are work days. This woman, Beth Troy says, make big, bold choices and real choices. Those yeses, those big yeses, require a lot of no's. And I can certainly attest to that. And that's going to be our show for today. We appreciate you bearing with us in terms of the technical difficulties that we had, but it turned out well. We thank Dawn Novy and the effort she went through to be with us. And of course, we thank Barbara, Mychal, and Emily, and Sean, and the team. That's our show. Our guest list for next week includes another businesswoman, Chakotay Demings. And join us as we take you inside of Chakotay's world. I want to thank our sponsor, Best Girl. If you're interested in having your business to be a sponsor with us, get in touch with us. you know somebody you think would be a great guest, a great G-list guest, please refer them to us at either Thom at Best Girl or Emily at Best Girl. I want to thank Emily Hedrick, the communicator, our producer. Thanks, Sean Jones, the organizer. Remember, enjoy yourself. The weather's beautiful outside. Make every day count. Stay safe and peace.